Good evening, friends. It's Robin at Blooming in a Cage, a podcast for humans. I'm here coming in at the last minute because we snuck away and went down to the Blueberry House, which, if you're not from here, is a local watering hole, as they say, not a bar, not a saloon, an ice cream place. And got ice cream with my parents and just sat and it's like I call it the watering hole because we sat there and we saw a bunch of people we knew because it's kind of that place. It's actually was a decent day today. It got up. I said to my son in the afternoon when I got home, I said, "Hey, let's go on an adventure because it's actually nice out because it's been raining for 5,600 minutes or whatever that is for that show Rent. I'll get it right. I'm tired tonight, friends. So I hope you'll stick with me. I hope you'll hop in the chat and maybe wake me up. I actually had coffee ice cream. Hope maybe there's caffeine. Is there caffeine in coffee ice cream or did I just waste my time? It was delicious. Blueberry House has a lot of cool flavors. They had one called vegan Oreo. What is vegan ice cream? Is it soy or oat? It didn't say, but I was very intrigued by it. They have a lot of good moose tracks, Mississippi mud pie, which if my brother Andy's in here, he'll be jealous that I missed the opportunity to have that. Blueberry cheesecake. They actually have blueberries there and they grow and sell blueberries. Thus the name Blueberry House. They actually have two locations if you're here. They have one downtown, the Bee's Nest, where they have ice cream and they make homemade waffle cones. I always love the smell of waffle cones. I never get one, but I always like the smell of it. I'm kind of a sucker and I actually was different tonight. My kids are probably going to be shocked when they see this that I had coffee ice cream because usually I'm a vanilla and peanut butter sauce girl. But tonight I was feeling different. I was hoping that the coffee and sugar might give me a buzz and wake me up because I'm tired, y'all. I'm just tired. I don't know why. Maybe it's just all this rain that we've had and you would have thought the vitamin D that I soaked up today look, I'm yawning. Would have been enough. Excuse me. I am tired. Anyways, if you're here, hop over the chat and tell me your best tricks for trying to wake up when you're tired. Because I am, and not Red Bull, because I don't like that garbage. But whew, I did have a Diet Mountain Dew earlier and brought up the rest of it with me tonight to be on the podcast. I hope you guys are having a great night and enjoying the fact that maybe we're getting some nice weather. I do know it's supposed to rain here tomorrow. It's gross. It went from being like sunny and 70 to being rainy and like in the low 40s for like 3 or 4 days. Ugh. We went up and opened our camp up this past weekend, like a lot of people did this long holiday weekend of the past weekend. We opened up our cabin and we saw some friends and we opened up camp in general. And I was just really excited for camp meeting. If you're starting to make your summer plans, the plan to at least come to White River camp meeting, which is the first full week of August, at least for one of the nights or one of the days. We have some fantastic speakers for the week, some great fellowship, great food, even hamburgers at the snack shack, just a good time, a great getaway. If you're looking to go for the week, shoot me a message. I would gladly give you information as to who to contact about lodging. There is a few Airbnbs and hotels even nearby if all of the lodging is filled up. I do think we probably have some tent sites. I'd have to check on that. But it was just a good week. Hi, Debbie. Oh, it was good ice cream. They are wonderful Christian folks down there at Blueberry House. And I enjoyed a little coffee ice cream, which I had not had in a really long time and just thought, why not? And I was hoping that maybe it have caffeine that would jolt through at least maybe the sugar will. Hope you're doing well. Have missed seeing you the last couple weeks. I was at a church and then you were at a church. So I hope we'll connect soon and that spring is finally here and we can get those garden plants. I am not a gardener, but I know there are some out there that like to garden and put their flowers and whatnot. And I'm sure that they're enjoying the little bit of bereavement from the spring rain that we've had. It was nice to be able to ride around with the windows down today. And anyways, it was a nice weekend we had. I hope you had a good holiday weekend and we're able to remember why we enjoy a long weekend and the freedoms that we do for those that have served and given the ultimate price that we can remember them. It was just a good weekend to see some friends at camp, and I'm hoping that we're gonna have some weekends at camp and just sit out and drink an extra cup of coffee or tea outside. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to sit somewhere peaceful and just kind of rest and contemplate. I'm a big contemplator, to think about big things. I'm not once for small talk, but I love to sit in God's nature and just think about his goodness, and the things that he's speaking to me, and maybe slow things down a little bit, put the phone away, and just be quiet. And I love doing that. And I'm hoping we have a few projects we need to do formally. First and foremost, the front steps of our cabin need to be replaced. I will be glad to be the foreman and assist my husband in building. I am not great at power tools. I just put that way, but I'm a great assistant by sitting with a cup of coffee. I was thinking of my friend Dee Dee today. Dee Dee has gone on to be with Jesus just a little over a year ago. My son and I were talking about peepers. Dee Dee, like every time I hear a peeper, I think of Dee Dee. But I remember a big project that we did at White River. It's been a couple of years ago now. We made this coverage, like a pole barn, basically to extend our seating to our tabernacles, and the walls come off, and it's just a beautiful place. If you have a squirmy baby or it's a hot summer night, it's nice to sit out there and have the cooler, just to be able to be included in the service. And Dee Dee and I sat in 2 lawn chairs and supervised her son and grandchildren and some other talented craftsmen as they built this pole barn, and we sat with coffee and watched them. I'm a great foreman, but not so much at the power tools. I like to sit and watch other men and women work. Just hard labor, not my thing. Tonight's text, let's get down to it. I'm yabbering on here a little bit because I'm tired, and I hope that if you're watching, that you'll, 1, share this because I think this is an important message, and 2, that you'll chime in with your thoughts and feelings and snide remarks. I will say that I will be happy when the pollen season is over, because your girl's got some allergies wicked lately. So our text tonight comes out of the book of Judges, chapter 6. And the title of this topic, this discussion tonight, is Tearing Down Your Father's Altar, which seems sacrilegious at the title alone, an altar being something sacred, and being that scripture often tells us to respect our elders. But stick with me a little bit. And personally, I think this topic is really important to me. And the reason that the Lord stirred it in me is because I see so many people that are stuck kind of in the things of the past, if they'll make sense. The way that their family has always done it. Hello, my friend Melissa Townsend. See all my people coming in here and keeping me awake. I'm a little tired tonight. So I was really thinking about one thing that keeps me tied to my past or my family is kind of nostalgic feelings, right? I put on my Facebook, I should have put it up tonight. I put up on my Facebook I think it was last week, a picture of me and my grandfather sitting at his kitchen table. It was some sort of birthday party. We had birthday hats on, and he was a big tease, Red Nichols, and I like to, and one of my favorite things is I like to tease him. My mom was telling tales out of school on me about my grandfather suffered a stroke, a pretty massive stroke when I was 12. And he lost the use of one leg and one arm. He did regain a little bit and was able to walk, but never regained use of his arm. So when we would go to places like Kmart or Walmart, we would push him in a wheelchair because it was just kind of exhausting for him to walk that far. He could walk, from his chair to the bathroom or the kitchen and that kind of stuff. But any long length of time was difficult. And I remember pushing him through the ladies' lingerie. And if you know my grandfather, he was a very modest man. And you didn't talk about the feminine, delicate items that women wear, and those types of things would have been very embarrassing. And I drove him through the night negligee section, Walmart moo-moos. He did not appreciate it. But I really was thinking about my grandparents and my parents, and as I was talking last week with Forcia about depression, and I was thinking about my Nana and a lot of things and my family's life that we've kind of inherited. And sometimes we inherit things from our family that are maybe not like, I definitely say that my brother and myself and some of my siblings have inherited my grandfather's kind of snarky, sarcastic sense of humor. We all like a good practical joke. And some other things definitely have inherited the gift of hospitality that both of my grandmothers had. and my parents have carried on. But there's also things that we inherit from our family that we might not necessarily want. A hot temper, a tendency for addiction, a tendency for depression or anxiety, some of those things, but also idolatry. And that's the thing that we're going to kind of dive in a little bit into, and where this title, Tearing Down Your Father's Altar, comes from. The text is Judges 6, chapter 6, verses 11 through 27. And I'm going to encourage you to go back and read this whole chapter, but for time's sakes, I've just kind of summarized this story up. And most of us know who Gideon is if you're been in the church or a Bible scholar at all. You know about the Gideon and his mighty men and how they went to war and were able to take back the land, using some jugs and lights and men that drank water properly and the whole story. But what I want to kind of put up to you is, what if you're waiting for a breakthrough in your family and in your own personal spiritual life? And what if that breakthrough starts with tearing down something that's kind of hidden in your own household? Today, we caught a rodent, and my brother and my brother-in-law were teasing me. I'm terrified of rodents. And one of the things that rodents do is they hide when you're around. They're very good at hiding. That's why you lay out traps for them, because you want to find them and catch them when you're not there. So sometimes there's stuff that's hiding in our family, just like a rodent that's kind of hiding in your household and taking ravishing on your pantry, but yet you're having a hard time tracking it down to get rid of it. And if you could just get rid of it and kind of clean house, your household would run better. And the same is true for families, that sometimes there's things hiding in families, and the breakthrough that you're looking for can't happen until that thing that's hidden is kind of exposed. So Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 27, this is the summary here. While hiding from his oppressors, the Mennonites, Gideon was visited by the angel of the Lord. He was actually on the threshing floor. And the angel of the Lord calls him a mighty man of valor. I love that word, valor. Anyways, it's such a, like, it reminds me of like the knight in shining armor, like Prince Charming, right? Coming in and saving the day. And that's what this angel of the Lord calls Gideon. And he tells him that God is with him. And Gideon really struggles with that belief. Here he's been told that he's a mighty man of valor and that God is on his side. And he struggles with that. And I think that that's something that I really relate to, right? We know the truth of God's word. And you know what? Like, trust has been a big word in our house this year. And it's like, I know that God is trustworthy, right? I know that here, right? In my head. But my knower, as I call it, my heart, has a hard time knowing that. And so I have to work on trusting him. And I think that's kind of how Gideon felt, that like he was struggling with this belief that he was a man of valor, a mighty man of valor, and that God was with him. And Gideon struggled to believe this. And he asked the Lord while Israel was suffering. And this is a pattern that we can see in the Old Testament, that Israel suffered a lot, right? We know that they went through the desert a lot. Life, they constantly I'm gonna have to get a cough drop here, kids. They constantly, and to this day, the nation of Israel still struggles with people pursuing them for evil. And so God, basically, Gideon said to God, if you're with me, like, I'm an Israelite, if you're with me, then why are you allowing Israel to suffer? Why are you allowing this to happen? And I think that maybe in our own lives that sometimes we can feel that way. We have hardships, we have seasons that come into our life, and we're like, God, if you're really with me and you're really for me, why is there suffering going on in my life? And if God is truly present, he questioned where the miracles of the past have kind of gone that God had done for the Israelites before. And the Lord responds by commissioning Gideon to deliver Israel, assuring him that his divine presence would be with him, that they would have victory. And Gideon, still again feeling unworthy and weak, which I think we all can relate to, he asks God for a sign. He prepares an offering. So he gets a lamb, he prepares this offering. And what happens is an angel miraculously comes down and consumes the offering with fire, and then it just disappears. He just consumes it with fire to the point that it's just gone, bones and all, And realizing then, after seeing this miracle, that it is in fact an angel of the Lord that's come to speak to him, Gideon fears for his life, which I understand, right? You've asked the Lord for a sign. He says he's with you. He sends an angel down to send fire on the altar and destroy this offering and make it just completely disappear, this animal. I can understand the fear that Gideon was feeling. But God reassures him again with peace and responds. And then Gideon builds an altar and names it, "The Lord is Peace." And I think that it's a great reminder to us that Gideon probably was feeling fear. We know he was, right? He was fearful for his life. He was not feeling full of valor. He was not feeling that God was on his side. And so he builds an altar and he names it that the Lord is Peace. And this passage here in Judges 6 really marks Gideon's divine calling, a moment of fear and doubt, then reassurance and consecration. A lot of us have had labels from our family or something from our past that we can relate to being like Gideon, who was hiding from his enemies on the threshing floor, afraid for his life. Yet the Lord is peace, and he comes to us even when we're hiding and afraid. And that's what the Lord did for Gideon. So what labels do you maybe have on your life, or something from your past that's kind of kept you fearful that God was really with you, that he really did have the best plans for you? So that night, after Gideon has built this altar, God commands Gideon to do something. And this is really what struck me when I read this text. God commands Gideon to tear down his father's altar, which had been built to the false god Baal, and to take down the pole and to build a proper altar to the Lord. And Gideon obeyed. And I think that is would have been a hard choice. If you think about it, think of a tradition that your father or mother or grandfather had. And think about the Lord saying, "I want you to never do that again." That's what the Lord asked Gideon to do. He asked him to take down an altar, a sacred thing that his father had built with his own hands. And to not only take it down, but to replace it with a new one, to a different God, completely separate from the traditions of his father and probably his grandfather. And Gideon obeyed. He was afraid for his family. So he carried out God's instruction secretly in the middle of the night with the help of about 10 servants. Again, he was hiding. He was afraid to even do the thing that God had told him to do, even though he knew that it was the Lord and that the angel of the Lord had come and he commanded him to do this. He carried these things out at night. And this passage here highlights Gideon's first act of obedience, which really was confronting the idolatry in his own family. And I really reflected on this in my own life And I have two very godly parents, and I was raised in a very godly family. But there are still things in my family history that are not godly. I have, and I was thinking about this after our discussion last week about depression. My Nana really struggled with depression. Actually had to be institutionalized at times, had a nervous breakdown, as they would call it. I don't know what they would call it now, but my dad has struggled with depression. I have other family members that have. Some have been medicated for depression and anxiety. I have alcoholism in my family, in my family line on both sides. Addiction of other kinds. Those are all idols. And I say that because when you have something in your life that consumes your life, it becomes almost a religion. Now, don't say that I'm saying all people that suffer with depression are idolaters, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that sometimes there's patterns of behavioral, generational curses that where we say, that's just how it is in our family. Have you ever heard someone say, well, that's just how the women are in our family, right? They're all nervous, or they all have depression, or all the men in my family have struggled with alcoholism. What are we really saying? We're really saying that there's something that was built and has now been carried down and not taken down in our families for generations. And when Gideon took down the altar to Baal, this false god that symbolized child sacrifice, worship of a false god, money, sexuality, all these things that people offered to Baal, that we can see throughout scripture and actually history. What he was saying was, this no longer is acceptable in my bloodline. And now the peace of the Lord will continue in my family. That's the altar that he built, and he called it the Lord's peace. That it will no longer be this false god that celebrates the murder of children, the sexuality of human beings, perversion. He was building a new altar. He was changing the course of his bloodline. And even though he was afraid, and even though he carried out the instructions in the dark where no one could see him, it was his first act of obedience by confronting idolatry in his family. And it kind of shifted, I think, for Gideon and for us when we confront idols. Hi, brother. When we confront idols in our family and altars, and when I mean altars, it's kind of like a sacred thing. And I think for some people, there are, I'm going to be really careful with how I say this. There are traumatic things that have happened in families that become altars. And what I mean by altars, it's like the wound is never healed. We just kind of revisit it and stare at it. It's kind of like when you see like a dead animal on the side of the road, right? You go over and you stare at it. Nobody moves it. Nobody wants to touch it. Nobody wants to deal with it. We just go, that's really sad. Look at that. But yet it's traumatic to look at. And trauma in family can kind of be like roadkill. It's like that thing really happened and it was really terrible. But rather than someone dealing with it and cleaning up the mess, we kind of just all kind of stand around at it and stare at it and almost worship it as if it becomes our whole identity. Have you ever met somebody whose trauma in their life was literally their identity? It's like, oh, hi, nice to see you. I have an alcoholic dad. That it literally becomes their entire being. And I'm not downplaying trauma, but what I am saying is that There are altars that were built by our bloodline, our fathers, and I use our father as the example of the head of the household, right? That somewhere in our bloodline there was a head of a household that allowed idolatry, sinful behavior, worship of something that was not of God to be built and raised up as normal, to where we just say, well, that's just how it is in my family. And God was calling Gideon to deliver his people, his nation, his family. But first, Gideon's identity needed to shift. And in order for his identity needed to shift, he needed to break down his father's altar, this idolatry worship, and he needed to allow the Lord's peace to start to shape his identity, the call of God on his life to shape his identity, rather than who his father was and who his grandfather was and who his great-grandfather was. That his bloodline would no longer distinguish who he was. And for a lot of people, that's really real, that you don't want to be. You've actually said the words, I don't ever want to be like my father. I don't ever want to be like my mother. I'm going to be different. Yet we haven't tore down the altars of our fathers. The call of God may be the very thing that breaks generational cycles. You see, Gideon was asking the Lord to be with him because he knew that his nation, his people, the Israelites, were being hunted and oppressed again by the Midianites. And so he asked God to deliver them. But what God said was, Gideon, I want to use you, and I'm paraphrasing, I want to use you, but first you need to deal with this, and then I'll be with you. I'm right here, but first you need to take down this altar of your fathers. You need to tear down the pole, get rid of it, and build an altar to me. And then the call of God on your life will come to fruition. And then you'll break the generational curses in your life, these cycles that you can't get out of, where you'll no longer say, that's just how it is in my family, that it'll be different for you. God instructed him to tear down his father's altar to Baal. Gideon obeyed at night, and fear didn't stop him. He was scared, but he still did it. It just shaped kind of his method in a sense. And this was really the first act of spiritual warfare before leading a nation. What is an altar in your family that God is asking you to tear down? After his obedience, Gideon was no longer hiding. He was delivered. He was actually the deliverer. And that's the beautiful thing about breaking generational curses, breaking generational cycles, tearing down altars that our family has built before us, is we come out of hiding to these things that were never spoken of. A pattern that we see in families with abuse is a lot of hiding in secrets, whether it's physical or emotional or sexual. It's kind of like it's a hush-hush thing that no one talks about. Most everybody knows. Even people that you think don't know. Same thing with addiction, right? Oh, I don't know, my dad's not feeling well, that's why he didn't go to work today, or he just has a hard time keeping a job, or my mom, she's just really tired a lot. She's not depressed. She's just tired a lot, right? There's a lot of secrecy, and we go in hiding. But you see, when you tear down an altar that's built to a false god or on a false premise or a generational cycle, that's what you do. And the Israelites, the interesting thing about the Israelites is that God delivered them over and over and over again. But every time they went back to the cycle of building an altar to Baal. Every time. Do you remember when Moses went up and got the 10 Commandments and he came down? And what were they doing? They were building an altar to a false god. Why God was speaking to their leader on the mountain. You can go back through the Old Testament and you can find time and time again where God delivered the Israelites, then they wandered in the desert and they went right back to the false idolatry worship. Why? because no one had torn down the altars permanently and given up the idol worship to worship the one true God. They wanted to do both. And for a lot of people, that's how we think. We think that we can keep the patterns and cycles and generational curses that have been in our bloodline, but we can't truly find the call of God on our life until we've been delivered from them. And what happened to Gideon is, after he came out of hiding and he built the altar to the Lord and he tore down the altar to the false god Baal that his father had built, he became the deliverer of his people. And the same thing's true for us in our life. When we confront generational curses in our lives and we tear down altars that have been built by our bloodline, we become the deliverer for the generations to come. But just like the Israelites, we find comfort in the things that we know. And that's why the Israelites always went back to idolatry worship. It's because it was something that they understood and they knew. And most of us in our lives, when we have generational curses, that's just normal. That's the way that we live. That's the way we work. So it's comfortable. But when you confront the altars in your family line, you unlock this authority for the generation, for your generation and the generation to come. And before God can bring a national deliverance, we see this pattern here with Gideon. Before God can bring a national deliverance, God has called us for a personal and family repentance. That revival starts at home, which we've talked about before. It starts with me. And God didn't send, you'll note, God didn't send Gideon straight into battle. He told him to deal with the idolatry that was close to him first. And oftentimes we want God to be with us. We want him to go with us into battle. And God says, I'll do it, but there's some stuff that you got to do in your own house. You got to clean house before we can go into battle. You have to start the small battle at home, the one that's personal, before we can go national. And those of us within the church that want revival, specifically here in New England, we have some personal revival in our home and our bloodline where we need to look and ask the Lord to show us altars that have been built by our former bloodline, our fathers, our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunts and uncles, and we need to take care of them and start to build an altar to the Lord so we can have peace in our bloodline. He told them to deal with the idolatry close to him first. We need to remove the altars to Baal and replace them with altars to Yahweh, the one true God. You may be the first person in your family to say that it ends with me. And I think that traditions are a big way that altars get built in our families, these false gods. Because tradition is comfortable. I was thinking as I was preparing for tonight, I was sitting on my couch and I opened up a bag of candy. Yes, I did. And I ate 2 single cups, snack size Reese's peanut butter cups. Something my grandfather did every night before bed. He would sit in his seat with a glass of Coca-Cola in this yellow insulated cup, which if I could find them, I would buy them, especially for summer. And he would eat a couple Reese's peanut butter cups. You can ask most of my siblings. Our favorite candy is Reese's peanut butter cup, without a doubt. We'll probably never say no to one because it's a family tradition. It's comfortable. It's nostalgic. It makes us feel warm. They're delicious, but it's also a reminder of the people who came before us. And none of us want to confront something that makes people that we love or have loved not be shown in a good light. But there's some things, some altars that we need to renounce. It's not eating peanut butter cups. I mean, maybe for your household it is, but it's not for mine. But there are some things in everybody's bloodline that we need to take care of. I deal with anxiety. I don't have anxiety. I deal with anxiety. And it is something that's in my bloodline. And one of the ways that I really started to confront it with the Lord was when I started to see it in my children. And the Lord really showed me that I have to deal with it with myself, and I have to show my children how to deal with it and how to pray against it and how to confront it, that it will be something that my granddaughter, my beautiful granddaughter Chloe, will never have to deal with, because it's something that we've dealt with in my family. So we need to renounce, go to spiritual warfare, go to deliverance, have people pray, ask your elders and your pastors in your church or your small group leaders, your youth leaders, to anoint your head with oil and renounce every altar that's in your family line that is built to a false god. And a false god, it's easy to identify. Anything that is outside of the character and the word of God is a false idol. The word of God says that he doesn't give us a spirit of fear. So if you're dealing with fear, you know that that's not something that's of God, that needs to be dealt with. And oftentimes it becomes almost an altar, an idol, because it consumes us. Anything that consumes your life that's outside of the character of God has become an altar in your family. Maybe it's addiction. Again, a cycle that's just the way it is in your family. I've heard so many people say before, well, all the people in my family deal with that. Okay, so great. Now you have an opportunity to make sure nobody else in your family deals with it. Idolatry is passed down from generation to generation. And you need to ask the Lord that you want to receive the call that he has on your life and identify it, and that he would give you courage like Gideon to obey him even when it feels costly. And that's the thing about tearing down idols and altars and cycles and generational curses and things in your bloodline, however you want to name it. I don't know if you've heard the new song by Alex Warner and Jelly Roll called Bloodline. Not even believers, as far as I know, but what a great song about breaking generational curses. Because sometimes there's things in our life that are really, really hard, and we need to be the one that stands up and say, just because it was in my bloodline doesn't mean it's going to continue. And there's a lot of emotions that go with that. And it's okay to feel those, just like Gideon felt those feelings. But we need to have courage and to obey, even when it feels costly, that it might cost something, a relationship, or to make somebody else feel uncomfortable. And that we need to not just stay in the wine press, not threshing hold, like Gideon was, hiding from his enemies, that will come out, that will boldly stand, because we know the Lord is on our side, because he has given us peace, because that's the altar that we built for our family to worship. I got to scroll down my notes because I'm blind and I can't see. So what are the altars in your family history, habits, mindsets, compromise that you feel that God is calling you to confront? That's what I want you to meditate on. What are the things that are habits or mindsets or compromises that you feel like the Lord is calling you to confront? Because what God has called you to might feel bigger than how you see yourself, but it might be because you have these things in your life that need to get removed in order for you to fully walk into the call that God has on your life. Have you ever obeyed God in secret that led to a public freedom? And what I mean by that, I mean that sometimes there's things that God calls me to do that's simply between me and him. You know, when God asked Gideon to take down this altar that was built to his father, he didn't say, I want you to go out and make a Facebook post, Instagram post, go on your Snapchat story, go on TikTok and make a TikTok and show the whole world how you're taking down this altar. No, God just said do it. And sometimes there's things in our lives that are just between us and the Lord. In order for us to grow and to become what God calls us to do, sometimes there's things that we just don't have to announce, that we can just say, okay, God, I'm going to do it. and I don't need anybody else to help me. I just need you and me, and we're in this together. And it's what it's going to do is it's going to free you up in public to be able to walk in a greater calling that God has on your life simply because you obeyed him in secret. Maybe I don't like the word secret, private. Let's use that word. The wine press or the hidden place that God has you in right now, he wants to use as a launching point. And that kind of that secret obedience that God has you doing, the one that's not announced, it doesn't have to be flashy. There's no Facebook post that needs to be done. It's not like I'm going to renounce alcoholism in my family, because probably what that will do is make all of your family unfriend you on Facebook. It doesn't need to do that. It needs to be in private with your confidants, with those spiritual leaders, or maybe even by yourself. So what are the modern days altars that we might inherit or build? So just to give you some ideas as you seek the Lord: alcohol, drugs, pornography, gambling, even seeking the approval of other people, pride, gossip, especially when these patterns are kind of normalized or minimized in families. What does your family learn to cope with that God wants to heal? Because a lot of times there's things in our family that we know we're not right, but we kind of just like cope with it. Like, because I can't do anything about it. It's just how it is. Generational, physical, emotional, or spiritual cycles of abuse, patterns of emotional detachment or toxic parents, narcissistic behavior. Sometimes what feels normal in a family is actually a form of bondage. So ask the Lord to show you, is there areas of bondage in my family line that we just feel are normal and I can't see? I remember when I first got diagnosed with a genetic disorder, I suddenly realized that the way my body functions is not normal, is not how normal people function. And it was like mind-blowing to me. So ask the Lord to show you what's normal in your family that's not of him. That's an altar that's built to worship a false god, something that's not of you, that's keeping you from fully walking in the call that God has on your life. And when Gideon obeyed the Lord, he didn't just change a nation. We know that he led the Israelites to freedom, right? Against your enemy. He changed his family's legacy. And that's really what I have been grieved for some people, is their inability to break some generational cycles in their family, because it would mean doing something that might kind of upset the apple cart, I guess is the right term. Lack of mindset is a big one. Never believing or trusting that God will provide can be an altar, passed down from generation to generation, who live through poverty or trauma. Keeps people stuck in fear, unable to really receive God's abundance. Tearing down an altar of that kind of mindset will be able to help you build a well of God's provision in your life. Racism, prejudice, bitterness. You ever know some people that are just bitter toward everybody? They hold on to something that happened 25 years ago by an old coworker, and they just can't stand them. They see them in Walmart, and it just rises up. Those are inherent attitudes that you can pass down to your family, like tradition. Unforgiveness, tied to generational trauma. These altars provide pride and self-protection, and God is calling us to tear those down and to build reconciliation. Manipulation or control, religious shame, manipulation, again, judgment instead of healing and restoration. True deliverance comes when we trade control for surrender. Generational patterns of adultery, lust, gender confusion. Those are all altars that can be passed down, generational curses that can be passed down from one generation to another. When you see people who have, maybe it doesn't manifest in the same way, but you see people who are those things that I talked about, adultery, lust, gender confusion, those are all kind of operating in the same spirit. Altars that exalt themselves, and sexuality above the truth of God's word. Kind of that free love generation to sleep with who you want. But God is calling us to concentrate our bodies and our identity. And when we tear down the altar of compromise, God restores our true identity. Lies spoken over you as a child, like you're just like your father, you'll never amount to anything. Those are things that we need to unpack and tear down and to build an altar to the Lord. These become kind of these internal altars that are built that we kind of live under. And God's voice is always reclaims the identity and tears down every curse word that didn't come from him. And just because someone said to you that you're just like your father, who maybe was a no good, you know what, doesn't mean that that's who you are, because that's not who God's called you to be. Worship of being successful, fame, influence, image. These are very common. Keeping your appearance up. You know, that family that appears to have everything so perfect, that's an idol. Even ministers can have those idols, and it takes the place of God where they think they want to be perfect. Anything that has a throne in your life that belongs to God is an altar that needs to fall. Climbing the corporate ladder, burnout in the name of success, the worship of that hustle. And that's such a common word these days. I'm just out here doing the hustle. I'm just hustling. Boss mom, right? You know, boss woman, boss man, just killing it. You're killing it. You're out there making, what's your 401k? What's your retirement plan? What's your investment? What's your stocks look like? Those are all things that become, if I can just make enough money or build my platform, then I'll be secure. The Asher pole that the Lord asked Gideon to remove represents the fertility goddess, often connect with sexual rituals, which show up again in those patterns of sexual addiction and pornography, entertainment, redefining the moral base, gender identity, transgender. If it feels good, be true to yourself, then it must be right. Baal, often worshipped, was often about manipulating the outcome, making sacrifices of rain and to get rain in order to success and fertility. This often is reflected in the culture of trying to control every outcome, self-help without surrender, idolatry and independence, people-pleasing, fear of rejection. And these kind of, Gideon's father built this altar, and sometimes the most difficult altars that are tied to our family are tied to the church tradition, stepping on people's toes, culture, and those things can all stray from God. Religious habit without a relationship, expectations from your family that contradict your calling. We've always done it this way mindset. We've always gone to this church. This is where I go to church, regardless of what's being preached from the pulpit, whether it's truth or not. That's an idol. That's an altar. I can't rock the boat. That's just how I was raised, is a modern altar. I don't know if that spoke to anybody. You guys are all pretty quiet in the chat tonight. Maybe I'm touching too close to home. But what I have felt is I felt the Lord calling me into a greater ministry of deliverance. And if I feel like God's calling me into deliverance, the one thing that I felt that I needed to do first was to deal with the things in my life that are not of God. If I'm going to help other people tear down altars in their life and walk in freedom, then I need to examine my own heart in a secret place with God. I'm not going to come on here and say, this is the idol that God and I dealt with this week. So that won't get any views from me. Mostly probably because I would be too full of shame and fear of rejection from you. It comes when I get into a place where God calls me to something greater. And because he's calling me something to greater and bigger and deeper, it means that I have to examine altars that I might have, because that's just all the way we've always done it, or that's just how we are, or That's just the way we do things in my household. And what I need to do is I need to build an altar in my heart to the Lord and yield it and surrender it to Him and ask Him to be like the angel of the Lord that came to Gideon's offering and he consumed it, everything in. And I was thinking the other day in church, the psalmist David said, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me." That's really what breaking generational curses are. It's saying, Lord, anything that's in me and in my bloodline and in my history, I want you to make new, a clean slate. And I want you to examine me and see what's in me. See if I have any wicked ways in me, which we do, in case you didn't know. And not be afraid of that. But even if I'm afraid, we have this phrase in our house, like, you can do it, you can just do it afraid. And I think that somehow we have the idea that if God is calling me to do something, then I have to do it and I have to not be afraid. God has asked, I can't imagine that the Israelites, when they faced the Red Sea, that they stepped into the Red Sea without any fear. Or that Moses went to go speak to Pharaoh without any fear. Or when Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on the water, that there was no fear. Right? There's fear and obedience can sometimes go together. We can do hard things. My brother Andy told my son recently when he was talking about feeling anxious, he was like, you know what? Every time I feel afraid, you know what I am? I'm just awesome. And my son actually was telling somebody the other day, Andy, he was telling somebody, my Uncle Andy said, every time I feel anxious, to just be awesome. We can obey the Lord and still be afraid to do it. I think that just means that we know who we're serving, or maybe we're not sure of the outcome, but I'm going to trust you, God. I'm going to trust that I want to see freedom come. And I think that, Gideon, when he went to the Lord there early in chapter 6, he said to the Lord, like, why is it not easy for the Israelites? Like, why do we keep on having hardship? And then God called him this great man of valor, this mighty man. And he wasn't feeling that way, but he still obeyed. And I think that's a lesson that I'm kind of taking away from this chapter, is that there's some things in my life that I need to remove, and I need to replace them with an altar to the Lord, which really is concentrating my life to Him, saying, I'm going to worship you and only you. No matter what the patterns of life that has been built up in my family line, I'm going to worship you. No matter even if I do something that's not the way anybody in my family has ever done it, but because that's what God told me to do, I'm going to do it. And it might look really different than something anybody else has done, but I'm going to do it. And I might even do it terrified. I've actually been thinking, and I've said this, so it's not a secret, that I've had a few people tell me that God's calling me to a greater deliverance ministry. I got to tell you, kids, that's frightening. Messing with the devil, not sure I'm excited about it. I'm not sure that I really want to talk to demons. Not sure I want to. Pretty sure I'd sign up I'd rather go get ice cream at the Blueberry House with my parents than do that. But what I do know is that the call on God's life for Gideon brought deliverance to his nation and to his family. And that's what I want for my family, and that's what I want for my nation. That's what I want for my town. Tomorrow night, I'm going to sit at Food Pantry, and I'm going to have a bunch of people pass through my door that really need deliverance. They really need deliverance from generational curses, altars, addiction, pornography, prostitution, depression, anger. So many angry people. Just patterns of life that are ungodly, that are sent by the enemy for one reason: to kill, steal, and destroy. That is his only purpose. And if God is calling me to be a part of that, I'm going to jump in with 2 feet. I'm going to build an altar to the Lord, and I'm going to say, okay, God, you with me? Because I don't want to go in here alone. And the Lord is going to say, I'm with you. Build an altar. Let's bring some freedom to some people. So I'm going to ask you to one is to pray and ask the Lord, what is the altars that are in my family bloodline that I need to tear down? What are the poles? What are the pillars in my family that need to be taken down? What hard conversations do I need to have? What private discussions with the Lord do I need to have to confess things that I think need to be torn down in my family? What deliverance ministry do I need to have to break these generational curses in my family life? Because I want freedom for my family and for my nation, for my community and for my town, and for my children and my grandchildren. We sing that song by Carrie Job in church, The Blessing, and I used to think it was kind of a silly worship song, to be honest with you, because it seems like you're blessing people. And as I kind of think about worship songs, I kind of think it's about God. But I've shifted my thinking on that because it's really reminding us, like David who went in the cave, of the truth and promises of God. And the truth is that God does set before us blessings and curses, and we get to choose. That's literally what he said to the Israelites. I set before you blessings and curses. You choose. And time again, they chose the curse. Time and time again, they went back and built an altar to a false god. And God still stands before us and he says, I have blessing and curses. You choose. And I want to choose the blessing because, like that song says, to my children and their children's children, and I'm butchering the words, but you get it, that it talks about to generations to come and generations to come, that the blessings of God would be on them, that his favor would shine on them. That's what I want. And if it takes carrying down some altars, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to allow the Lord to consume up anything that I offer up to him. That there would be nothing left of me and only the call that God has on my life. Only the things that he wants me to do. And that's what I want to encourage you to do. If you want to see blessing in your household, in your bloodline, in your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and generations to come that you won't even be able to see, if you want to see that freedom, that you'll ask God to show you the altars that you need to tear down in your family's bloodline. Because it doesn't have to be the way it's always been. It can be something different. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight, guys. I do have a guest coming up in a couple weeks, not next week, but the week after. Let's see here, Debbie. Debbie, what'd Debbie say here? Thanks, Debbie, for chiming in. My father always criticized me I don't always feel worthy of things because of this. That is a powerful statement. And it really is, Debbie. It's an altar. And I'm going to pray that the Lord helps you to tear that down and that you'll see your true identity as a daughter of the King who is highly favored and loved and has a great calling on their life. And that's unfortunate, but it is a story old as time in many people's lives. I struggled a lot when I was younger because I was the homeschool kid with people saying things like, oh, you're just a dumb homeschool kid. And I still struggle with that, feeling stupid. It's something that I've really worked on. Thanks to my amazing husband who's helped me tear down that mindset. And that's really, and altars are sometimes mindsets. They're patterns of life that we get into based on our family's bloodline that we need to break off of us and walk into the identity that God has called you to, which is to be a daughter of the King. Oh, my Amanda. Everybody's chiming in here now as I'm getting off. I feel so loved. That's my girl Amanda I liked my best friend's pictures. I thought of you this weekend. We were at camp. Hopefully we'll see you soon, maybe at a weekend at camp. That's that time of year. Amanda's little girl. She's my best friend. I know. We're like almost 50 years apart. 45 years apart, but she's still my best friend. She showed some sweet pictures on Facebook this week. She's such a sweetheart. I hope you guys have a great summer. School's almost out. I hope you survive the summer. Just use ice pops. That's what I did with my kids. Ice pops and kiddie pools, and you'll survive summer. Thank you guys for hanging out with me tonight. Anyways, I was going to say, my special guest, Stephanie Hamill, is going to be on in a couple weeks talking about the industry that she's in, navigators, and the call of God on her life and what navigators are doing. It's a great outreach. Oh, you're in Arkansas. Nice. Open up the camper. It's that time of year. I opened up my camp. Anyways, I'm going to have Stephanie on to talk about navigators in a couple weeks. And then I'm going to take the month of July off, just giving you the heads up, because I need to prep for this little thing called White River, and I need to redeem some time. And my prep time for the podcast is that time. So just know you're going to have me in the month of June. Then I'm taking the month of July off, and I'll be back. Well, I'm actually taking more than that. Back the couple weeks into August after we get done with family camp. I love y'all. I hope you have a great night. Remember that God loves you and he has a wonderful plan for your life.